Ladies and gentlemen, on January 6, 2026, the White House press secretary stood in front of cameras and confirmed something that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. The United States is considering using military force to acquire Greenland. Not against a hostile nation, against Denmark, a NATO ally, an original signatory to the treaty that has kept the peace in Europe for 75 years. And if you think this is political theater, that it's just bluster designed to distract from domestic issues, you need to understand something. This isn't the first time America has tried to buy Greenland, it's the third. And this time, the administration isn't just making offers, they're threatening invasion. 3 days after that press briefing, President Trump told a room full of oil executives, "We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not. I would like to make a deal the easy way, but if we don't do it the easy way, we're going to do it the hard way." By January 11th, on Air Force One, he made the stakes even clearer. If we don't do it, Russia or China will, and that's not going to happen when I'm president. This isn't rhetoric. Reuters reported the administration is actively discussing direct payments to Greenland's 57,000 residents, between $10,000 and $100,000 each. That's up to $5.7 billion in cash, straight to their bank accounts, to convince them to secede from Denmark and join the United States. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is scheduled to meet with Danish and Greenlandic foreign ministers the week of January 13th to discuss terms. And here's what makes this moment different from every other time America has wanted Greenland. The ice is melting, the minerals are exposed, the shipping lanes are opening, and the Arctic is no longer frozen wilderness. It's the most contested strategic prize on Earth. My name is Ryan, and I've spent the last decade analyzing geopolitical strategy and resource conflicts that most people never hear about until they're already happening. If you want to understand why global power is shifting, why alliances that seemed permanent are fracturing, and why the next generation of conflicts won't look anything like the last, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see what's coming. Because what I'm about to show you isn't just about Greenland, it's about what happens when climate change, resource scarcity, and great power competition collide in a place most people couldn't find on a map. And the decisions made in the next 6 months will determine who controls the Arctic for the next century. Now I know what you're thinking. Greenland, the ice sheet? Why would anyone go to conflict over 836,000 square miles of frozen rock? That's the trap right there. Because Greenland isn't frozen anymore, not like it was. And what's underneath that ice? What's adjacent to those coastlines? What's opening up in those waters? That's why 3 superpowers are circling like sharks. Let me give you the context. Most news coverage is skipping. This isn't new. America has been trying to acquire Greenland since 1867. That's the year Secretary of State William Seward, fresh off purchasing Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million, commissioned internal studies on acquiring both Greenland and Iceland. The State Department concluded both territories offered strategic value for any future conflict in the North Atlantic. The studies were filed away. Nobody acted. But the thinking was planted. Then came 1946. World War II had just ended. The Cold War was beginning. And President Truman made Denmark a formal offer. $100 million in gold. Not paper currency, not treasury bonds, physical bullion. The Joint Chiefs of Staff described Greenland in classified memos as indispensable to the safety of the United States. Denmark declined. But here's what most people don't know. Denmark said no to the sale, but yes to something almost as valuable. In 1951, they signed the U.S.-Denmark Defense Agreement, granting America permanent military access to Greenland. That foothold still exists. Right now, at Patuffik Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base, the United States operates the northernmost military installation on the planet. The 12th Space Warning Squadron sits inside that base, scanning the polar routes 24 hours a day for ballistic missile launches. It's one of the most critical early warning systems in the American defense network. And there's precedent for this kind of transaction. In 1917, the United States bought the Danish West Indies for $25 million in gold. You know them today as the U.S. Virgin Islands. Denmark has sold territory to America before. So when Trump first floated buying Greenland in 2019, it wasn't absurd. It was historical pattern recognition. But here's where it gets darker. What I'm about to tell you next is the thing that took me years to piece together from declassified documents and investigative reporting. Because what Washington built in Greenland during the Cold War wasn't just a radar station, it was a nuclear fortress hidden under the ice. and the plan was so ambitious, so reckless, that when it failed, they just walked away and left the radioactive waste buried under 2 miles of frozen water. In 1959, the Army Corps of Engineers carved a base called Camp Century into Greenland's ice sheet. The public story was scientific research, climate studies, ice core analysis, humanitarian aid. The real mission was classified under a project code named Iceworm. The goal was to carve 4,000 kilometers of tunnels beneath the ice to hide 600 nuclear missiles on underground rail systems. Mobile launch platforms that Soviet satellites couldn't detect. The base had living quarters for 200 personnel, a hospital, a chapel, a movie theater, and it was powered by the PM-2A portable nuclear reactor, one of the first of its kind deployed in a remote environment. For 7 years, Camp Century operated in complete secrecy. Then the engineers discovered a problem. Ice moves faster than they calculated. The tunnels were shifting. The structural integrity was failing. By 1966, the project was abandoned. But here's the part that should horrify you. They left everything behind. Tens of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, polychlorinated biphenyls known as PCBs, which are toxic compounds used in electrical equipment, sewage, and low-level radioactive waste from the reactor, all of it buried under the ice. The assumption was the snow would keep falling, the ice would keep accumulating, and it would stay buried forever. Except now the ice is melting. A study from the University of Colorado's Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences projects that by 2090, those contaminants will start resurfacing as the ice sheet retreats. Camp Century isn't just a Cold War relic. It's a ticking environmental time device that Denmark will have to deal with. And guess who's not offering to help clean it up? Now let me show you why this matters right now. Because this isn't about history. It's about 3 overlapping strategic realities that are converging in the Arctic faster than any government is prepared to handle. And if you understand these 3 factors, you'll see exactly why Washington is willing to threaten a NATO ally to control Greenland. First, the naval chokepoint. There's a corridor of ocean between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom known to military strategists as the GIUK gap. It's one of the most critical naval choke points on Earth. Russian submarines transiting from their Arctic bases to the Atlantic Ocean have to pass through this corridor. Control Greenland, and you control the western wall of that gate. You can monitor every submarine, every surface ship, every aircraft that moves through that space. During the Cold War, NATO ran constant patrols through the GIUK gap to track Soviet subs. That mission never stopped. It just got quieter. And now, with Russia modernizing its northern fleet and operating new ballistic missile submarines, the GIUK gap is more strategically important than it was during the Cold War. Here's the math that keeps Pentagon planners awake at night. The distance from Moscow to Washington, traveling over the Arctic, is barely 2,000 miles. The distance from Moscow to Washington, traveling any other route, is over 5,000 miles. Greenland sits directly in the middle of that shortest path. If you're defending North America from Russian bombers or hypersonic missiles, Greenland isn't optional. It's the front line. Second, the rare earth minerals. And this is where China enters the picture. Greenland's Kvanefjeld deposit contains over 1 billion tons of ore rich in neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium. If those names mean nothing to you, here's what they do. Neodymium is essential for the powerful magnets inside electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, and guided missiles. Praseodymium is used in aircraft engines and military optics. Dysprosium makes magnets heat-resistant, which is critical for high-performance military applications. China currently controls 80 to 90% of global rare earth processing capacity. They don't just mine these materials, they refine them. And that gives Beijing leverage over every country that needs them for defense manufacturing or green energy transitions. While Washington was joking about buying Greenland in 2019, Chinese state-backed company Shanghai Resources quietly became the largest shareholder in Energy Transition Minerals, the company that holds development rights to Kvanefjeld. Their stake is between 9 and 12%. Not controlling, but significant. Greenland ranks 8th globally in rare earth reserves, with 1.5 million tons of recoverable materials. If those deposits come online, and if they're processed outside Chinese control, it reshapes the entire global supply chain. Now, do you see why Trump said if we don't do it, Russia or China will? Because China is already there, not with soldiers, with investors. Third, the shipping lanes. As Arctic ice retreats, Russia's northern sea route is becoming navigable for longer periods each year. That route shaves 10 to 15 days off the transit time between Asia and Europe, 25 to 35% faster than going through the Suez Canal. China calls this the Polar Silk Road. Beijing published an Arctic policy white paper in January 2018, officially designating itself a near-Arctic state, which is a diplomatic fiction but a strategic signal. China is building icebreakers, funding Arctic research stations, investing in port infrastructure. And Greenland sits adjacent to these emerging shipping lanes. Whoever builds the ports, the refueling stations, the search and rescue facilities, whoever provides the infrastructure that makes Arctic shipping viable, they become the toll booth of future global commerce. Right now, Greenland has limited port capacity. No deepwater commercial harbors on the scale needed for container shipping. That's an opportunity. And Beijing, Moscow, and Washington all see it. Okay, quick check-in. Still with me? Good. Because what comes next is the part most people never hear about. The part that explains why Greenland's government just told the United States, unanimously, to back off. Here's the leverage Denmark has over Greenland, and it's almost entirely economic. Every year, Denmark sends Greenland 4.45 billion Danish kroner. That's roughly 640 million US dollars. That annual payment represents over 50% of Greenland's public budget and about 20% of its entire GDP. Without that money, Greenland's government couldn't operate. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure, social services, all of it depends on Copenhagen's checkbook. Greenland has been pushing for independence for decades, but independence without replacement funding means immediate austerity. Tax increases, service cuts, economic collapse. So here's the game Washington is playing. In 2020, the US reopened its consulate in GIUK, Greenland's capital, after decades of closure. They allocated $12.1 million in aid. Not much compared to Denmark's contribution, but it was a signal. We're here, we're interested, we can be a partner. Then, in September 2025, Denmark panicked. They pledged an additional $253 million to Greenland, clearly trying to shore up the relationship before Washington made another move. It didn't work. Because the people of Greenland carry wounds that money doesn't heal. In 1951, the same year Denmark signed the defense agreement with the United States, the Danish government removed 22 Inuit children ages 4 to 9 from their families in Greenland. The plan was to take them to Denmark, place them with Danish foster families, teach them Danish language and culture, and send them back as a modernized elite that could help govern Greenland in Denmark's image. It was cultural erasure disguised as humanitarian intervention. Half of those children experienced severe mental health crises. Half cast away young. The survivors spent decades fighting for recognition. In March 2022, Denmark formally apologized and offered 250,000 kroner, about 38,000 US dollars, to each survivor. The apology came 71 years too late, and the trauma didn't end with those 22 children. Greenland has one of the highest rates of tragic self-harm per capita in the world. The scars of colonialism, forced assimilation, and economic dependency run deep. So when all 5 political parties in Greenland's parliament issued a joint statement on January 10, 2026, their message was unambiguous. We do not want to be Americans. We do not want to be Danes. We want to be Greenlanders. That's not a negotiation. That's a declaration of identity. And it puts Washington in an impossible position. Because if America actually uses military force, Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has already said it would mean the end of NATO. Not hyperbole. The end of the alliance. Article 5 of the NATO treaty obligates every member to defend any member under attack. If the United States invades Greenland, Denmark would be legally justified in invoking Article 5 against America. That's never happened. It would shatter the alliance. It would isolate the United States from Europe. And it would hand Russia and China the greatest propaganda victory in modern history. Now let me tie all of this together, because when you see how these pieces connect, everything changes. This isn't about one president's obsession with buying Greenland. This is about 3 systemic forces colliding. Climate change is unlocking resources and shipping routes that were inaccessible for all of human history until now. Resource scarcity is making rare earth minerals a matter of national security, not just economic advantage. And great power competition is forcing every nation to choose sides in a new Cold War that doesn't have clear rules yet. Greenland is where all 3 of those forces intersect. It's the choke point for naval access to the Atlantic. It's the reserve of minerals that could break China's monopoly. It's the gateway to Arctic shipping lanes worth trillions in future trade. And it's the territory of 57,000 people who don't want to be pawns in anyone's strategy. Here's what nobody's saying out loud, but everyone in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing understands. Whoever controls Greenland controls the Arctic, and whoever controls the Arctic controls the 21st century. Let me show you the math on what America is actually offering. Reuters reported discussions of payments between $10,000 and $100,000 per resident. Greenland has 57,000 people. At the low end, $10,000 per person, that's $570 million. At the high end, $100,000 per person, that's $5.7 billion. Now compare that to what Denmark pays annually, $640 million. If Washington offers every Greenlander $50,000, that's $2.85 billion in immediate payments. But Greenland still needs operating revenue, so the deal would have to include infrastructure investment, annual budget support, and probably citizenship with full US benefits, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. You're looking at an initial outlay of $3 to $5 billion, plus ongoing costs of at least $1 billion per year. Is that worth it for the United States? The Pentagon's annual budget is over $800 billion. The rare earth minerals alone are valued in the hundreds of billions. The strategic value of the GIUK gap is incalculable. From a pure cost-benefit analysis, buying Greenland is one of the cheapest territorial acquisitions in history relative to its strategic worth. But here's the thing, you can't buy people who don't want to be bought. A Berlingske poll conducted in 2025 found that 85% of Greenlanders oppose joining the United States, only 7% support it. On the American side, a YouGov poll found that only 7% of Americans support using military force to acquire Greenland. 73% oppose it. So both populations reject the idea. But the administration isn't backing down. Because the calculation isn't about public opinion, it's about strategic necessity. And that's where this gets dangerous. Because if Washington believes Greenland is indispensable, and if Greenland refuses to negotiate, and if Denmark won't pressure them, then the only options left are coercion or force. Coercion looks like economic pressure. Threatening to withdraw from NATO. Cutting aid to Denmark. Isolating Greenland diplomatically. Force looks like what the press secretary confirmed. Military options, which could mean anything from a naval blockade to an actual invasion. And before you say that's impossible, that America would never invade a NATO ally, remember this. Trump already said it. Out loud. On the record. We're going to do it the easy way or the hard way. That's not a negotiation. That's an ultimatum. Now we're in the home stretch. And I've saved something important for the end. Because there's a psychological shift happening in Washington that explains why this moment is different from 1867 or 1946. It's the shift from seeing climate change as a distant threat to seeing it as an immediate strategic opportunity. For decades, climate policy was framed as sacrifice. Give up fossil fuels. Accept economic costs. Save the planet for future generations. But now, the Pentagon and the State Department are looking at melting ice and seeing advantage. New shipping routes mean new trade dominance. Exposed minerals mean resource independence. Retreating ice means accessible coastlines for military installations. Climate change isn't just a crisis to manage anymore, it's a map to redraw. And Greenland is the first territory where that new map is being redrawn by force. Here's the disturbing part. This is just the beginning. If America successfully acquires Greenland, whether through purchase, coercion, or force, it sets a precedent. Other Arctic territories become targets. Russia's Arctic coast. Greenland is the first stand of This Is Lessus. Russia's Arctic coast. Canada's Northwest Passage. Norway's Svalbard Archipelago. Every nation with Arctic coastline will face pressure to either militarize, align with a superpower, or risk losing sovereignty. The rules-based international order, the system of treaties and alliances that prevented World War III for 75 years, that system was built for a frozen Arctic. It wasn't built for this. And nobody knows what replaces it. The question isn't whether Greenland becomes more valuable. The ice is melting. The minerals are there. The shipping lanes are opening. Those are physical realities. The question is whether Washington takes it by deal, by bribe, or by force. Because right now, all three options are on the table, and Greenland's 57,000 residents who just want to be Greenlanders are caught in the middle of a strategic competition they didn't start and can't control. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen warned that a US attack would mean the end of NATO. She's right. But here's what she's not saying. If NATO ends, if the transatlantic alliance fractures, Europe is on its own against Russia, and America is isolated from its oldest allies. That's the cost of taking Greenland by force. It's not just one island, it's the entire architecture of Western security. And if that collapses, we're not in a new Cold War. We're in uncharted territory. The Arctic Cold War has begun. The ice is melting. The ice is melting. The powers are circling. And the next chapter of global conflict is being written in a place most people will never see. But you'll feel the consequences. What geopolitical flashpoint are you seeing right now that nobody's explaining properly? What's the next region, the next resource, the next conflict that you think is coming, but isn't getting coverage yet? Tell me in the comments, because that's what this channel is for, seeing what's coming before it's obvious. Your future self, the one who understands how power actually works in this century, is counting on you to stay informed. Not just about what happened, about what's happening right now. And Greenland is happening. Right now.